full of innovative and impactful products.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's me
that's
tapping
good.
into, I guess, my 8th grade presentation there.
That's when you first talked about eighth grade. I thought you were gonna say your favorite.
You know, that just capping on that answer, what really stands out to me when hearing you talk about that, Jeremy, is I really enjoyed reading about and learning about Socratic inquiry and Socrates, and
Oh,
I
that's good.
think I mean, I wouldn't necessarily change my answer because I would actually like to work alongside Socrates and Carver, but I don't know how working alongside Socrates would be, completely frank with you. But I do think that the um, being unafraid to challenge status quo and be inquisitive, right? And not, coming with a predetermined answer is a real hallmark of an excellent PM. I think it separates, particularly once you hit kind of a crescendo in your career around, it's not just about discovering value and product, it's about challenging the status quo. And I don't know, that's something that stood out to me listening to your answer.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I like Jamie's the best though. I thought that one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
That one worked better. Jamie,
Yeah.
you win. You win.
There you go.
So that kind of brings us to our first topic of the roundtable tonight. And our first topic, it's around basic mastering storytelling in product management. And so to the room, I posed a quick question to the chat room. Basically, what common mistakes should product managers avoid in storytelling? And so as people think about storytelling, it's definitely, I find to be a lot of the lifeblood and a lot of what helps drive success from the perspective of a product manager, more than the roadmap, more than the strategy. You got to be able to communicate and get that message across there. So if you're in the chat room, we'd love to hear what you think about the question just posed, as well as other questions you might have. So feel free to post other questions regarding the topic, other topics that you'd like to see us talk about and address throughout the evening here tonight. And with that said, I want to kind of move into what role do you see, Jamie, storytelling play in influencing stakeholders and aligning teams around a product vision?
Yeah, I think how you tell the story is probably the number one way to get buy-in from your key stakeholders. I think going to your question about kind of the mistake that a lot of PMs make when telling a story is they don't have a good understanding of their audience, and telling the story in a way that it's relevant to their actual audience. They may tell the story as they would like to hear, as they know the story, using points that are important to them. But in order to get the alignment across stakeholders, to get buy-in, to make sure the team is on the right page and things like that, I think it's important to tell the story in a way that resonates with those stakeholders, and then also tell that story in a way that resonates to potential buyers, users, and things like that.
Yeah. Raj?
There's a great question in the chat, actually, about
what
this.
Is it? Read it to us.
Help me understand why PMs are involved in storytelling to begin with versus PMMs or marketing.
Go for it.
And that, I think these are two things that actually overlap really well, right? If you don't know why you're telling the story, you're going to make mistakes and assume that writing the story, as the author of the story, you're writing it, let's say, for example, in the way that you think it should be read or you think it should be written, right? To to the point around, know your audience, right? Storytelling is core to product management, as much I think as the discipline was originally kind of founded, right? Back in whatever the when Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen and all that were like talking about the initialization of product management. What do product managers actually do? Well, Yes, it's about uncovering customer value. Yes, it's about, being able to understand what the intent is, market size, and all of those kinds of things. But ultimately, like if you look at the progression of where product management has come, it's not so much about just uncovering like the jobs to be done or what the customer value is or who you're going to sell to, et cetera. It's about understanding the purpose, the raison d'etre of whatever your product is actually supposed to do.
Fancy words tonight, I see.
Sorry. I mean, and that's a good call out. Raison d'etre, right? The reason for living, right?
Channeling the Paris Olympics, I guess.
Yeah, hey, the inspiration's got to come from somewhere. But it's core enough that, like, as an example, at Amazon, the practice for pitching a product is quite literally writing a story. They may call it the 7-page memo, but it's writing a story. And as you kind of progress through the PM career, you make different mistakes, right? Like as you're talking to, your engineering stakeholders, it's really about presenting the pain in a way that they can understand. And what's the counter to that, right? The counter to presenting the pain in a way they can understand is hewing too close to, and this is what it should do, right? And talking about the technical details and not enough focusing on the customer pain points. As you continue to grow in your career and you start talking to executives, there's different mistakes. As an example, if you're talking to executives and you focus too much on the micro pain points and not enough on the broader story, right, or how the value plugs into the broader organization, it's not just about landing your points there, right? You're helping turn the battleship. And if you can't paint the picture to the executives in a way that's consistent, not just with the overall company narrative, but with the mission of the organization, you're going to find yourself in a position where it's like, yeah, I know why people want it, but nobody cares, and you're going to get shut out, right? So I think that's it's really interesting.
Yeah. Jamie, did you want to add to that?
No, I think Raj. Yeah.
Good. So to you, Jamie, I want to. What do you see as some of those common pitfalls product managers should avoid when trying to use storytelling in their communication?
Yeah. So I think in my experience, and I'll just talk. Just what I've done in the past. I think when I first transitioned into product management, I came from like a SME role, subject matter expert. So I knew everything about the user journey. I knew I had been the user before. And so when I got my first PM role and I was trying to get everyone on board, it was like I just knew what I knew and I didn't care to understand the actual user journey, the user experience. And so how I communicated to the team was from a place of not really doing my true discovery. And so when I was telling these stories, my story was kind of incomplete. It had gaps because I just didn't do a good job of getting the right feedback, asking the right questions and things like that. So I think one of the pitfalls that PMs make when trying to tell a story is just not having enough background information to tell it in a way that clearly communicates what the pain point is, what the problem is, potential solution.
Gotcha. Raj?
I've definitely been in positions where I've misunderstood. I think the narrative, right? And that's not necessarily about uncovering what the value is to the customer. It's not even necessarily about how it fits in with the organization. It's quite simply around, look, there's an opportunity here. Are we going to pursue it or not? And folks may have alluded to hey, this is a great opportunity. Maybe we should do it. Maybe we should pursue it. But if there is a wind inside of if there's a wind catching the sails of a business, right? And it's moving in a direction, let's say that's, either pivoting or, potentially they're trying to capitalize on a specific market opportunity, talking about what happened 6 months ago or a year ago and saying hey, this is really important. And we talked about this and this is where we were, right? And it doesn't fit into, this is where we're going. means, you know, you kind of look like you're out of lockstep, right? Even if it's important, and even if folks talked about why it was important. And I found myself in that position of not paying attention to what was, you know, what was going on both in front of me and around me. So I totally get, you know, where Jamie's coming from about, you know, being kind of like being in a position where you're sort of myopic about like, oh, I actually do know what's going on. But not being able to step outside of that perspective and actually, you know, kind of get a third person perspective on yourself, you know, like a third party camera kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, you know, just take a step back.
So are you saying like when you're saying you're misunderstanding the narrative, is it about is it about is it about how do I want to say this? Misunderstanding the narrative, is it about just not keeping it up to date, not keeping it refreshed with present new
Yeah.
information, or is it
Great
something
question.
else?
Great question. You know, let's keep the same theme of everything as a story, right? All right, and you know, we'll do an example here, right? You know, in the scope of, as an example, like AI, right? We went through, because I don't know, that's the world that I live in, so I'm just going to use it. Okay.
It's the world we all live in.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I think that, you know, the seismic shift that occurred, what, like 2-3 years ago, around moving from, you know, what was classic ML and LP kind of things to where we are now, with everything is an LLM, right? Everything is LLM, right? I think there certainly were and are, to be very clear, techniques from other types of AI implementations, even classic ML. You know, you want to go down the path of, like, you know, computer vision and on all of those kinds of applications that are augmented and accelerated by, you know, foundational models, right, and more general purpose transformer models. But many of what already exists is actually pretty good. And so being able to, you know, articulate like, hey, what we were doing was actually successful for some customers. We should try and double down and extend some of those techniques, right? As opposed to kind of like looking into the future and being like, oh, and here's how we also integrate, you know, LLMs into this process, right? You know, you have to be able to couple what's happening when the ground is moving underneath your feet, even if you've got your eye, you know, on the customer value. And I think not being aware of that, that's something I suffer from. I realize, hey, we're delivering value consistently. There are these techniques that are on the table that we can use, you know, potentially let's go off the shelf. But hey, I mean, you know, in 6 months to a year, LLMs have changed everything, right? And so I think being able to be aware of what those changes are and how to incorporate that in your strategy is something that I've personally missed the mark. And really, like, when we're talking about a narrative, it's not just about what the story is of the product. It's not just about the story of the company. You need to have a broad perspective, right? You need to be able to read what's going on in the marketplace, because customers have this, you know, if you think about it, customers are reading your story, right? They're making an investment not just in your product, they're making an investment in partnering with you and consuming from your services. And if what they're reading out there in the world doesn't match with the message that you're sending, then it's like, am I reading the right story? Did I click the right article? Like, what is going on here, right? So it's really important to be aware of that. I don't know if that landed in a way that was consistent, but that's kind of where I, you know, to bring an example.
Well, I think it's interesting how you mentioned in talking about LLM, especially as we're talking about storytelling. I think there's two sides to that. There's two sides to the LLM story picture. One side for LLMs, we've got LLMs. AI is going to be able to do everything. It's going to solve every single problem.
I have to go on mute to laugh. Sorry.
Right, from curing cancer to just AGI, general intelligence, to, I guess, bringing about us just merging with machines. So
right.
So you kind of have one part of it, and I think the reason I like that you had mentioned LLMs, so you have on one side of that, I think the story, especially when you look at a lot of story that comes out of OpenAI, it's running away.
Yeah.
It's going so far. It's becoming so divergent from reality, and so into just science fiction, that I think it's disconnecting from users. And then you have the other side of it, where I think when you're framing a story, you're framing a story around a product strategy. You want a story that's connecting with users because it's going to solve an actual problem, and a story that's not saying and AI will do this, but just a story about what's the problem and what's the goal. Maybe LLMs power that solution. Maybe other types of AI power that solution. But really about making sure you're focused more on the problem than AI is the actual solution itself. So I like that you brought that up, because I think there's two different types of challenges when you're talking about AI and large language models, and SAM and everyone else kind of in that community, especially it being the hot topic of yesterday, today, and forever. Hopefully not, but
Totally.
for a long time. Jamie, do you have, when it comes to storytelling, and you look and as you look at different products out there, are there some products that you think do storytelling, that products and their product strategy where they really do a good job at storytelling?
A product that does a really good job at storytelling. Let me think.
Or perhaps a business that has kind of inspired you in how they approached it.
Hmm. Hmm. Nothing comes straight off the straight to mind. Let me think. I have to think about that one.
I know people often talk about like the stories that Apple tells, even though I think some of their ads might have fallen a little bit flat lately, as they've literally flattened artists. Raj, how about you? Any companies, any products that you kind of like the storytelling behind?
So I have one, but there was a thing in the chat that was fascinating to me. I'm sorry. Somebody mentioned
Go for it.
Berkshire Hathaway as a business.
I just saw that. I don't know what to do with that.
I don't know what to do with that either. I'm actually I would love to hear more about that. I mean, I think certainly
I think it's Janami, if I'm saying it
Yeah.
correctly. If you could elaborate as to the story of Berkshire Hathaway, I would please do.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
share it. We'll share it with others. But Raj, sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was just I'm just mulling it over in my head. It was pretty impressive. I think so. I think there are a couple out there that people underestimate. People underestimate the value of not just the user experience, but like the journey that they guide users through when they're first kind of like when they're first telling the story. Like the one that really stands out to me here is like Canva. Okay, so Canva is kind of like this like all encompassing. We're going to provide all these different tools for you, for editing, and here's how we're different. And but what's kind of interesting is as you kind of sign on board to Canva and start, because you come with an idea, you come with a purpose. They say, whatever the mission statement is that you're leading with, the Canva's mission statement, is that you can help you make magic or something like that. I can't actually remember exactly what it is, but like, you sign on board, you know what you're going to do. You start uploading assets, and then they build on top of that by providing recommendations and extending functionality. And you're already coming with a mission, but they layer upon layer and really bring you down into the user experience. Mm-hmm. That to me has been fascinating, right? Yeah. And I think another one that is actually quite inspiring, in a different model, in a totally different model, one that I've always felt kind of close to, which is still around and actually is like one of the OG YC funded startups, is Watsy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with WotC, but
It's not
WotC is
ringing a
this.
bell. What do they do?
Yeah, so it's a nonprofit actually, but it's a product that launched out of Y Combinator in the early days, and effectively what they do is they provide a platform for it's almost like GoFundMe, but explicitly for medical procedures and for folks that come from either disadvantaged positions socioeconomically, excuse me, or who have challenges getting access to healthcare. And they let the the target of the fundraise or whatever it is be the story, right? And they surround all the kinds of product, whatever it is that they're leading on. That's the real story, that's the real impact, and 100% of the funds go directly to that individual. And I think that's incredible, right? I've always felt a very personal connection to that.
Yeah, I think I do have two examples of companies that do a good job storytelling. I think Nike actually does a great job, especially when it comes to its run club. Does a good job of telling a story that anyone can be an athlete, and really does a good job of telling that story, but also creating a community around it, and getting that alignment in local areas. So I think Nike does a good job of storytelling, making it appealing, and getting people interested. And also Airbnb actually. I think Airbnb, I think recently I saw an ad where they talked about, hey, if your family goes on vacation and you're in a hotel room, then you all have the same, and you have a child, you all have the same bedtime. Um, and so I like the way that they frame that. It's like, hey, when you vacation, get a place that's convenient for the family. Everyone doesn't have to sleep in the same room, make it convenient. I think they just do a good job of kind of talking about that traveling experience, accommodations, and what that should be like for people.
I think Airbnb might have to do some work to get back to that story
Yeah.
a little bit, especially in places like Spain, etc.
Mhm.
I don't want to get shot by water. Jamie, so you mentioned Nike, and I agree with you there. And so, what is it that you feel makes the Nike story? What makes kind of a story in general powerful? How do you know? How do you use that storytelling to communicate your ideas effectively? How do you know it's landing?
I think that it's landing because it urges you to act. There's sort of a response to your story. I think as we storytell in product management, the goal is to get people aligned, get people bought in, get people to use the product. I think as Nike tells, and I use the example of the Run Club, as they tell their story, as they create that community, people are like, all right, I can be an athlete. I'm an athlete too. Yeah, I haven't ran in 20 years, but I can start today. And so I think they do a good job, and they do a good job because it inspires someone to respond and join a community and to act.
So, Raj, I want to kind of try to double click into this area a little bit too, and a little bit more. What other techniques do you feel help kind of build stronger connections with the audience? Whether they're their customers, they're your colleagues, your stakeholders. What are some storytelling techniques that help really bolster that product strategy?
Yeah, great question. One of the ones that I work at Microsoft, but I'm drawing inspiration from Amazon. Go figure. I don't know.
Okay, we won't tell.
Yeah, too late. One of the ones that I've found that's quite powerful is framing things as a press release. Because I think that like it's kind of a no-brainer. It's like, what is the value that we want to see people read about, right? Because people want to read about things. They like announcing things, right? People get excited about it. And so creating, a part of your narrative as a press release and let me be clear. I've used this sparingly because it is not right for everything. It does not land well when you're talking about very technical products. It does not land well when you're talking about internal products. It does not land well, right? But when the time is appropriate, it's a good one. So that's one of them. I think another one that I found pretty powerful, and I know that this, again, may not necessarily apply to all situations, but particularly along the lines of like customer development, right? If you go and you sit down with a customer and you actually get a real name and a real picture, right? Not just like user persona, but like, this is Raj. Raj lives here. Raj does this for a living. And this is why Raj's life is hard. You know, cue like Wikipedia, right? It's like of all things. But no, but seriously, like if you humanize it to the point where you can create attribution for a challenge, people no longer feel disaffected or it feels personal, right? You're personalizing whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. And that is a technique of storytelling that I found for folks that feel like particularly for engineers and folks that are technical, for folks that are pretty disconnected, it's a great way to make that connection.
Yeah, I love the press release method though. That's something I know Amazon does it, but I've stolen that. I've done it at my company. I'm really big on, hey, how would I want this to be presented to the market, and using that as how I help frame the story for our internal partners.
Yeah, I've the Amazon press release is something I've been teaching in my class for, I think, a decade now. I think, my gosh, I've been doing it that long. Over a decade, I guess. I've been teaching that, and I think in a lot of places you can't use it, but I would first preface it with saying, if you can't write a press release of kind of your ideal scenario for that product and get excited about it, and this is like, because everything is ideal. It's somewhat of a dreamland in that Amazon press release that you're doing. If you can't get excited for that, you're not going to get excited, and you might want to take a look to something else. But I would also argue, I would the one thing I'd push back with you, Raj, on is for some internal products, they should use the Amazon press release. I think too many internal products become products that you have to use it because the internal tools team built it, and so you have to use it. It would have been nice if that team had tried to say, hey, what could I do that would make them excited to use this product, or would actually be helpful? I agree. Like it can get tougher in some other scenarios, but heck, even a database. If my customer are engineers, how would I write a database release about a database that would maybe make those engineers excited about it? So I think there's definitely a place for it, but I always tell people, like, if you're working on a new feature, you're working on a new idea, like if you can't do something that someone reads and gets excited about, you're probably going to need to look somewhere else there. So yeah, the Amazon press release has definitely been one of those very helpful go-tos over the years.
Sorry, to that point, Jeremy, and by the way, I totally appreciate that you're absolutely right that it's appropriate, and database is a great example of this. Right, everybody's using their own off-the-shelf DB, and now we're going to standardize on something. And here are the value points. It's like you got to get as much past like the own intra-evangelism kind of thing as much as you have to get through describing the value. So totally. Another one that I've seen that has blew my mind recently is folks will like. Particularly now that I'm part of like an org that has a lot of folks that are very visual, which is not something I've had in the past. GIFs of the product in action, of like success stories and whatever it is you're doing, like early, often as fast as possible. Like, hey, this is a 30-second demo of it, right? Get people really excited. I mean, it's the kind of thing that now I think folks are using a lot more recently in blog posts and in, especially like internal emails. I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but like, if you're sending out like to a large distro and you want to get attention, a GIF is a great way to get that attention and drive those eyeballs. I mean, otherwise, you're just kind of sending blobs of text, and most people kind of scan the headlines and sort of like, check out. A GIF not only kind of like crystallizes the message that you're trying to send, but it also shows you as a user, if you have that problem, hey, this is how you fix it. And that's super powerful.
Yeah, there are two other techniques that I wanted to mention also that I've used to success in the past has been creating a miniature comic book, as well as kind of if you have resources, a sizzle reel. If you don't have resources, a sizzle deck, as to what the product would be like, what the experience would be like, and you might even want to go try to do a little bit high fidelity just to see if that idealized version would get people excited about it, so that they can kind of really connect to what you're trying to do. And those things I've used internally for stakeholders, for C-suite, externally press releases, articles. Just writing an article on a topic, that's a way to kind of flesh out a story or just see how people react. Are people reading this article? They don't even know it's necessarily about a feature. It might be about a related concept to what you're trying to do. But if they're interested in it, it's a good early indicator, almost kind of like an MVP, you might say. So how do you, so Jamie, when you're crafting, when you're working through a story, what are you doing to try to make sure that it is emotionally connecting with the audience? What are you doing to test it out and see if that's working?
Yeah, I think part of it is the imagery a lot. I think how the imagery kind of relates to the problem, the pain points, and things like that. I think that's very important to making sure you kind of, it evokes some type of emotion from your audience. So making sure the imagery, if it's you do a sizzle reel, is that imagery telling the right story? Is it speaking to the right problem, to the right pain point? I think that's one part of it.
So Raj, I keep talking about the emotional connection. I guess maybe I should be asking, is it important to have that emotional connection?
Okay.
Raj?
I mean, look, I think everything has its moment, and when you're telling stories, it's often important to connect on an emotional level, because we're not just building software, right? Or
Right.
forget about software, right? Like, you're not just building a product to sell it. You're trying to solve a problem. You're trying to address a need, and ultimately needs, like, all right, let's get into psychology, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? There's all kinds of different needs out there. There's emotional needs, there's whatever, right? There's personal needs, but at the core of it, you're trying to address a need. And if you don't understand that need in the full context, and part of that context is emotional, you're not getting the whole picture. Full stop.
Right.
Now, the point is a good one, actually, because functionally, it may not always be appropriate to have an emotional component to a story. And I'll give you a specific example of this, okay? Not all product launches are necessarily done to fill a need that wasn't existing, to gain more market share, or things like that. Sometimes, right, you need to do product releases that address gaps. So when I was at, it was a long time ago, but I was working at Salesforce, and there was a big, very large kind of like contentious series of blog posts and issues and things like that arose from a very specific thing. This is I'm dating myself. It's like 10 years ago. It was a thing called Routergate. It was part of the Heroku platform. And Heroku was very connected to the zeitgeist of developer productivity, developer experience, right? And a lot of folks hosted applications on Heroku and still do. And this certainly was a challenge, not only from a business perspective, but from a reputation perspective. And Heroku realized, like, hey, actually, there are customers that are having serious issues with this part of our product. So what's the response? Naturally, the response needs to be, yes, we're filling a need, but the need was caused by issues that we had in our product. So we have to be very clear, right? We're doing a product release because we have to issue a fix that was caused by something we did, right? It in no way, shape, or form does that diminish the fact that it is in fact a product release. And you may even be telling the story of, hey, this is a thing that happened previously. This is how it's going to be happening now. What's important is being able to connect the two and being very explicit about here is why that need exists without deriving any kind of emotional component out of it. We are fixing the experience. That is what's going to happen. And I think you've seen that crop up kind of often when companies are there's like some faux pas or something like that, like they have some functionality and they're like, oh yeah, like look, we own up to it, this is how we fix it, right?
But even in that scenario, though, I feel like there is still some type of emotion that was evoked. So there was a pain point that caused frustration, and you got some relief from it. And so there was still an emotional aspect of it, even though.
True. Yeah.
Cool. Anything else you before I move on to our next segment? Anything else, Raj, Jamie, that you would like to add to the storytelling topic? I don't hear anything. Oh, go ahead.
I do like Joao's. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Joao's point in the chat around bringing personal stories to help the audience connect better. I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier with like the personalization aspect of it. And I think that's, you know, in terms of emotional engagement, just putting a face to a story is always going to up level it. I think that's all I'll say about that.
Awesome. So we're gonna wrap on our first topic of the roundtable tonight. If people have other questions, feel free to keep posing. Throw them into the chat room. If people have other questions, other topics that we end up that aren't necessarily on our agenda, feel free to post the questions. We'll definitely try to work them into the conversation as the roundtable continues. With that said, we're going to it's time for the trivia time of the night. And with that, our trivia tonight is, what popular methodology introduced the concepts of pivoting and emphasizing validated learning? So once again, the trivia question of the night, and don't post the answer in the chat room or anything like that, but what popular methodology introduced the concepts of pivoting and emphasizing validated learning? So I'll let everyone think on that. Let it soak in. Jamie, Raj, feel free to say stuff, but don't say the answer. We'll get to the answer later, or we'll see if we've got the answer later. So it's just something for everyone to play around with, think, ponder over as we get ready for our next topic here. And our next topic, we're going to be talking about decision making. Something that, I don't know if you're in product, maybe you're familiar with, something that we might do only about 1 million times a day, and then try to actually follow through on some of them even. The decision making, the cognitive, the emotional factors that come to play. Let's start simply. Jamie, what are, like, when we're talking about decision making, are there some key frameworks that you like to go to that help drive some of your decisions?
Yeah, I mean, the most basic level, the basic framework is just a cost benefit analysis. Hey, what is the benefit to what we're looking to do, and what's the cost associated with it? And then you can also add in there what's the effort as well. So you're looking at the value versus the effort, the cost versus the true benefit. That's just like very low hanging fruit, basic frameworks.
Raj.
I really like Pareto. I just tend to Pareto all the things, and I think it's an easy way to it's a really easy way to drive some focus, right? And
so explain that. So for those folks not familiar.
Right. So Pareto principle is that there's a large swath of things out there in any universe that could have a long tail of applications, but about 20% of the usage, or 20% of the users, or 20% of basically anything drive the lion's share of whatever you want to call it: revenue, events, user generated content. There's an increasingly small share of either product audience engagement, content creation, and that has an outsized impact on virtually everything, right? And understanding what's in that small slice, irrespective of the long tail of things, and being very clear about the impact of what and who and how many and where and why, right, of that small slice is functionally the distinction between evaluating things in a Pareto, like with using the Pareto principle or using Pareto analysis, versus doing things like as another totally different framework, right? Jobs to be done. I really appreciate jobs to be done. I think it's an incredible way to articulate, purpose, decision, and address outcomes. But I think when you're thinking critically and qualitatively about how to best make a decision, understanding, how Pareto drives focus is really helpful.
Mm. I think what's also very important is that there needs to be a framework. I think a lot of organizations are making decisions and they don't have a structured way to go about their decision-making process. And so I think one of the first things a lot of PMs need to do when they join an organization or get their first leadership role is to understand the decision-making process, and then document the process. What are the important elements of what goes into a decision and things like that. There's a lot of frameworks out there. But I think it's important to pick one and stick to it, or have a few of them that you can use in different scenarios.
Excellent. And I see Derek citing Knevin framework, oldie but a goodie. So in addition to a lot of these frameworks, when you are trying to drive decision making, what are the how do you balance, what are the benefits of kind of coming at it, looking at the quantitative versus the qualitative decision making methods? Raj?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think folks who come from backgrounds that are rooted in engineering or mathematics or more quantitative disciplines tend to invest, and whether appropriately or inappropriately, a lot more on the quantitative presentation of data versus the qualitative. And that tends to and makes sense, right? Like if you're coming from a science background and the data is the data, science is what it is. There's no guesswork involved. But when it comes to product management, particularly when it comes to motivating teams, it's often the case that both are equally valid and both are equally valuable. And I think it's important to understand who and where you're targeting the consensus around, right? Because decision making implies two things. The first is that you're trying to drive to a decision, right? You're making a decision, right? As PMs, right? Like we can say that we make decisions. We don't make decisions, right? We cultivate, we curate decisions. And you can say at the end of the day, this was my decision. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you say this was your decision and nobody backs you up, you're alone in the room, nobody made any decisions.
I like that. Cultivating is definitely a much better way to present that.
Right. And so I think, forging consensus is as much as much an exercise in balancing the presentation of what you're providing as evidence, right? Whether it's quantitative and qualitative, as it is trying to bring everyone together in a way that they feel empowered. And that's why it's so important to understand. Like if you're in a room with a bunch of folks that are, as an example, focused on the messaging and marketing led, and all you're doing is just hammering charts and data, and you're like working in like a Jupyter notebook, and you're just like showing a whole bunch of charts in Python, you're not going anywhere, man. I'm sorry. There's no quality in that. There's no personal element. So that's what I think it's really important to keep both in mind when you're trying to arrive at that decision.
Yeah.
Talk to me about a little bit, Jamie, about the cognitive biases that can affect the decision-making process in product management.
Yeah, so I think earlier when we talked about storytelling, I talked about coming in as a subject matter expert and how that kind of clouded my how I told stories a little bit. I think that's definitely a cognitive bias that, because as a subject matter expert, you feel like you know it all. Well, quote unquote, you know it all. You don't, but you think that you know it all, and therefore, because you know it all. Say we're using rice as our decision making framework. You know the reach, you know the impact, and things like that. You don't kind of do the homework to understand from a user's perspective because you already know all this stuff. I think that's a cognitive bias that PMs, we have to keep in check. We have to make sure that we remind ourselves that though we have industry experience, we have a strong knowledge base in our product, and we have a PhD in the problem and things like that. Still making sure we're asking the questions, still making sure we understand the pain points and what the problem is that we're solving and things like that, so that we don't have that bias, or we can at least try to keep it in check.
Gotcha. I was going to go to Raj, but he seems to have. There he is. Raj, I was wondering. Welcome back.
Just had to turn on the fan, man. Over here in California, we're at like 95 degrees. It's like, oh my gosh.
Same in New York.
Yeah.
And I assume where I assume where Jamie is, it's potentially even hotter. So I wanted to ask you about how you manage and try to mitigate the effects of different types of what are some of the cognitive biases you come across, or you kind of have maybe frameworks or processes in place to try to mitigate, and how do you do that?
Gosh, that is a deep question.
I try.
Mm-hmm.
Very introspective.
Yeah. Well, let's try to flip it inside out then. What sort of cognitive biases let me say it this way. What do you do in your decision making to mitigate potentially cognitive biases driving folks astray?
Your own thought process. Yeah, totally. I think this is it's hard to catch. It's hard to catch yourself, particularly as the domain and the scope tends to get more expansive and complex. I think sample bias is the thing that I struggle with the most. And I'll be very clear about that, actually. Like, I adhere very tightly because it helps me personally, right? And I think and in my opinion, product management is extremely personal, right? And the thing that helps me personally is understanding how value relates to a specific, either individual or set of use cases. And that's something that I tend to fall back on, right? When I need to check myself, to your point, Jeremy, when I need to check myself and I need to figure out, like, what am I doing here? I go back to the persona. And oftentimes my persona is grounded specifically in folks that I've spoken with. And it's totally possible. Like, Jamie, to your point around, being the previous SME, it's totally possible that things can be overlooked in that sample. It's totally possible that sample might be underrepresentative or misrepresentative. And that's something that I challenge myself on. And to mitigate that, I try as much as possible to get a variety of different voices in that sample. And, you know, I mean, people will talk about this. I'm going to go off on a tangent here just for 30 seconds. Like, it is so important, particularly in PM, to get a diversity in voices.
Right.
It is so critical because of this reason. Sample bias will drive overlooking both key value propositions and key mistakes that you make in your decision-making process. And I've been subject to both.
Yep.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, you finish your thought, and then I'll add.
Yeah, no, and so when we talk about, you know, mitigating cognitive bias, I think there's an importance in being aware of not only what drives yourself personally, what motivates yourself personally, how you yourself as a product manager, you know, tap into your own superpowers of understanding, and what you're, you know, talking about the superpower metaphor, like every superpower, every superhuman, right, has a weakness. Know what those weaknesses are. Like, if that, like, sample bias is my kryptonite, I'm going to be very honest about it. So I got to figure out a way to get around it.
I think one other thing is, I think in my experience, I've also had stakeholders who were closer to the client, got a lot of qualitative feedback. There also were kind of the biggest titles, the biggest paychecks in the room. And a lot of times people with the fanciest title make the most money, also tend to be decision makers at the end of the day. One of the ways I kind of protect ourselves from just going based on qualitative stories and allowing people who don't necessarily have all the information be the only ones driving the decision is to make sure that we do have that quantitative data as well. So though the qualitative stories are great, they help us kind of understand the why, they do help us make decisions, things like that. But we do, in order to protect ourselves against the bias, we need to also make sure that we have the data that's also supporting the same decision. So I've in my experience, I've had people say, hey, this is what I'm hearing from the clients. We need to go out and build this product. But then when I try to unpack and say, hey, what's the market size? What is the potential adoption rate? What is going to be the usage rate? What is the potential revenue? We don't have answers to those questions, or the market is not there, or there is actually no new revenue. It's not going to help us protect or keep our current revenue or anything like that. And so I think it's important to also make sure you're asking the right data questions.
Yeah, so speaking from my own kind of personal philosophy, I have a personal philosophy of always leaning into discomfort. And I say that because I really like when things are steady state. I really like when things are going well. And it just feels so awesome every day. It's just like, wow, everything's just humming. But I also know that if I'm not leaning into discomfort, if I don't do something that was maybe a little awkward or a little uncomfortable every day, I'm probably missing something. Maybe whether it's managing my team, maybe there's a problem on the team that they need help with that I'm just oblivious to a product strategy or an unmet market need or a flaw in my product strategy that I need someone to poke a hole in. And so, like, it might just be, I'm going to run this by this one guy who always disagrees with me about everything. That's fine. I just want to see what holes he's going to poke in it and for me. And it just kind of, and also, hey, I'm in front of an audience that my idea is not fully baked, but I'm going to throw it out there. It might get torn to shreds, but you know what? I'm leaning into that discomfort, and let's see what happens. Let's see where it falls, or if it doesn't fall, or even worse, I'd say if no one pokes any holes in it, man, did they just not even care? So I always have that kind of general philosophy of leaning into discomfort and trying and just using that as kind of my early warning signal of I didn't feel uncomfortable today. I did something wrong.
That kind of goes
to go back and do something there.
That kind of goes to Raj's point, and I think John in the chat as well talked about what you're doing is like the crowdsourcing, getting diversity of opinions. I think that's really important. I know that saved me a lot throughout my career, is making sure I'm talking to the most people possible, having conversations with people that I don't typically agree with. But I think what's also important is that cannot be a one-time thing. That cannot just be at the first stage of the process. That has to be something that you continue to do throughout the entire process. Because I've also been in situations where I think I'm aligned with everyone up front, and then come demo time, they're asking me all these questions, and I'm like, oh, that's outside the scope. We talked about this. I thought we were aligned, things like that. Now I'm frustrated and things like that. So
that's not just outside the scope. You guys were just dreaming about a completely different feature and
exactly,
product altogether.
exactly. So I think it's important to continue to crowdsource throughout the entire process, just not one time.
Yep. So Ruben's got a question here that I'll throw as a toss up to the roundtable. Is there a favorite decision making tool you rely on for validating a product, an MVP, or something you won't go without? I'll throw it to you, Raj.
This is the trivia question. Okay, let's try.
No, that's a different one. So do you have a favorite decision making tool?
Well, the reason why I call out the trivia question is because actually the validation that I try and do for, okay, so you called out an MVP. I think an MVP is a great approach to doing this. Customer development has, and this is kind of a philosophy with a series of different, tools and decision making things and all that kind of stuff. Customer development boils product validation down into something very simple, which is the absolute, the absolute smallest iteration of value that you can drive for any given small subset of users. I'm not even talking about MVP. In fact, like often enough, true customer development can come from things like a spreadsheet or like an Excel file. Like it's actually pretty simple how you can go about doing the quote unquote validation of something. I've even been in situations where I've been in customer interviews and I've asked, like, hey, what is the problem you're actually trying to solve? And there's like a one sentence kind of thing, like, oh, this is the thing, and then I'll go into like a PowerPoint deck and I'll just like, is this the thing? Was that, did I fix it? And most of the time they say no. Sometimes they say yes. And if they say yes, I've struck gold, right? But yeah, I'm going to stay broad based here, but customer development has a bunch of different things that you can read on, which I think hit the nail on the head here.
Yeah, I want to say to that, I am very impressed
Yeah.
with how well and thoroughly you answered that question without ruining the trivia answer. My cheeks.
That's why I was like, I don't know what to do here. Like, what am I?
My cheeks hurt right now. They're hurting. So I thank you for that. That was great. Let me pivot a little bit. We'll still stay with the decision making because I know where you wanted to go, and we can definitely talk about it a little bit more when we get to that. But when it comes to decision making, and a subtopic of decision making that I really don't see discussed all that much is regarding how do you managing the stress in in those uncertain environments, reducing your stress, maintaining clarity in your decision making process. Jamie, what do you do to manage the stress of just the decision making process, making sure you have that clear head?
Well, I'm really big on communication and alignment. And I think if you are able to communicate effectively and often and continue to do check-ins on the alignment, I think that goes a long way in reducing stress. I've noticed that when I know that everyone's aligned, I know everyone's been updated and everybody's confirmed they've been updated, I tend to be less stressed. I get most stressed where people are uninformed, and they were in a meeting and they said they don't know anything, and now we have to pivot or I have to answer all these hard questions. So I have my hardest time when people around me on the team are uninformed. So I go above and beyond to make sure everyone's informed and making sure everyone's aligned. And that's how I kind of keep my stress levels down.
What do you do, Raj?
Well, I consider myself, when I'm in positions of high stress, the thing that makes me feel de-stressed or like lower levels of anxiety is contingency plans. Because I don't like being in situations where I am unprepared for outcomes. I mean, I think Jamie kind of like, literally hit about 90% of the thing you need to do, which is that you need to be aware of who you're talking to, what their situation is, make sure you have their questions answered, their concerns addressed, and everybody's walking into the room feeling like they have a personal, stake in the consensus, not the outcome, but the consensus. And then, once you've gotten past that, it's not really a question of like being stressed. It's just like, what is the consensus and where are you going with it? But, let's say that you've addressed that 90% and then you're now at like you're past that point. For me, it's like, well, look, the consensus maybe we do nothing. And if we do nothing, what's going to happen? We're just going to sit here and throw up our hands and we don't have a plan? That's stressful for me, right? Like not knowing the eventuality of what's going to happen if everybody walks out of that room and the actual agreement is like, look, we're not going to do anything here. Not doing anything doesn't mean we're literally not going to do anything. Not doing anything means nothing is going to happen and so then what happens after that, right? And what are we going to do about that? And so and the eventuality, I've had this happen to me before personally, where I walk into a situation with 30, 40 different stakeholders. And I've spoken with many of them. I haven't spoken with some of them, but I've addressed the situation and I kind of have an idea of where things are going to go. And I was kind of totally and completely incorrect. And everything went exactly the way that I didn't want to see happen. And now I'm in a position where I'm not exactly sure what to do. I didn't have a plan, right? And when I don't have a plan, unfortunately, if I'm the one making the proposal, that ends up coming back to me because people will look at you and say, okay, we don't like what you said. So what? Who's going to tell us what's next? And if you don't have something to come up with, which is here's what happens next, yeah, then you're kind of under the gun and you need to figure out what happens. So having a contingency plans or a series of contingency plans, even if they're just written down on paper, is a good way to de-stress.
Yeah, wargaming stuff out. Planning for some of the planning for those things that would really make your day suck.
Right.
Definitely come in handy there. I'd share. So for myself, I'm thinking I'm kind of come at it from just a kind of like a personal wellness perspective, in that if I'm going to be making good decisions, I'm going to be clear-headed. And so for myself, some of my strategies, mindfulness comes in handy for me. Setting aside just kind of like quiet, structured thinking time in my calendar, just so that I know that if I spend the time to think on a problem, to just have that uninterrupted time so I can kind of get into that flow state, I'm going to catch more things that need to be explored, identify additional opportunities or problems that I know I'll want to bring up with different groups of folks. So those two things definitely kind of help keep that stress level down, and also work towards optimizing the foundations of the decision-making process, you might say. Do you guys do anything else kind of on in the personal wellness side of the equation?
No, but I need to. I definitely need to.
I thought you were going to say something else, and then you caught me there. How about you, Raj?
I found actually, and one of my former mentors taught me about this, but like, exercise is the best outlet, for de-stressing. Just like throw it in there, at the middle of the day. If it's like a heightened thing, and I'm just like a ball of like, like I just feel like I'm like nowhere, nothing is going to be productive. Sorry, And by the way, I also think it's important to say, at every level of the ladder, that there are going to be times when you are unproductive. Okay, people. We look at the executives, we look at folks that we look up to, and we say like, oh, they're doing so well, they're impacting so much, and those folks are equally as affected by anxiety and stress as everybody else, and that does affect decision making, and it can federate, right? Analysis paralysis can federate through an organization, and that's just as toxic as letting it affect yourself, especially as you go up. And so, like, one of the folks that I look up to, and I still look up to, and I'm going to call him out by name because he's an incredible individual. His name is Mike Pyle. Used to run worldwide sales and Salesforce, GitHub, and like very large GitLab, very large organizations. And he taught me the value of physical fitness, affecting your mental fitness and affecting your emotional wellness. And it's made a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I don't do physical fitness. I'll probably just eat a lot of ice cream when I'm stressed. That tends to help as well. So, everyone has their own approach.
Oh, yeah,
like
ice cream. I guess if I like to really focus me, I'll do a cappuccino. It could be, and it also could be 98 degrees. I'll do a cappuccino. I'll drink it outside. It'll just completely zen me out.
That's a move.
Or in other words, I have a caffeine problem.
Yeah,
but it works. I know to lean into it.
Yeah,
sorry, you were saying.
Outside of, I joke about the ice cream, but I think stepping away is also a good technique as well. It's okay to walk away. It's okay to take 15 minutes, walk around. I don't know where you guys are working in the office or at home, but walk up and down the driveway, walk around the house, do something. I think taking time away from work to think about something outside of work is also helpful.
Great. All right. So with that said, I guess we all know what time it is.
Is it trivia?
You mess with me right now. It is trivia time. That's what that wonderful music is for. So what popular methodology introduced the concepts of pivoting and emphasizes validated learning? All right. What popular methodology introduced the concepts of pivoting and emphasizes validated learning? And so with that, if you're in the chat room, post your answers in the chat room. Let's see who gets the answer there. And let me first go to Jamie. Do we have an answer, Jamie?
I thought it was going to be Moscow.
What? Oh, you said Moscow?
Yeah.
Moscow? Sorry, it's not that one. Not that one. It's not a bad framework. It's weird. We're touching all the things from my class. All right. You know who we're going? Raj? The answer is?
Well, I don't know if I got the answer or not, but like Eric Ries kept just scratching the back of my head. And I was like, oh, if I say lean startup, I think I am probably in trouble territory. So, but yeah, I'm going to go with lean startup.
Yeah. So just some background for folks. That's correct. So some background for folks. And today's question, and what popular methodology introduced the concepts of pivoting and emphasizes validated learning? It emphasizes build, measure, learn. It's inspired by manufacturing, driven by continuous experimentation to validate or invalidate hypotheses. The goal is often described as fail fast. I hate that way of describing it. I always describe it to my teams and students as learn quickly, because we're trying to learn, and we're trying to learn as quickly and efficiently and as productively as possible. And I'd also say, and many companies have employed this approach. Dropbox created an early MVP, which was basically just an explainer video and a pitch deck, and that was their whole product. Zappos posted pictures of shoes online that they took from pictures that they took pictures of shoes from local stores. Groupon set up a WordPress blog and posted PDFs of coupons to the WordPress blog to see if it was to see if anyone would be interested in what they had to offer. It's been adopted by companies large and small. And it's lean startup methodology. It was popularized, as Raj, you said, by Eric Ries in his eponymously named book, The Lean Startup. So yes, that is the correct answer there. I guess I'll have to make Moscow an answer to a future question. Not a bad one. With all that said, anyone? So Raj, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to also add about lean startup methodology in follow up from the earlier part of the conversation.
Yeah, look, I kind of live and breathe lean startup on a daily basis. Like I don't, I mean, if you ask me like, how do you go about product validation? It's like, well, it's pretty straightforward. I think the way that I have described the way that I've described this approach to folks is that you are staring. The where you want to be is you want to be at the center of an onion, right? You want to be at the very smallest part of that onion that you can grab in your hand and say, I have solved this problem. I have fixed this for you. I see this in my hand. It's crystallized. It's like so small. Like I have turned on that light switch for you, Mr. Customer. Okay, cool. So, or Mrs. Customer, I should say, right? Cool. So you've turned on the light switch for the customer. That's great. Okay, what's the layer around that? Well, I gave you this beautiful room that was lit by all of these amazing spotlights. Now you can see around you. Okay, great. What's after that? Well, clearly you had some kind of a problem around real estate. So now I've given you a warehouse and you can put all the things in the warehouse and you can see everything. And so going outward from this like tiny kernel of value and understanding exactly what that kernel of value is and expanding outward from there is an approach that is, in my opinion, like quite literally fail-proof. Like, I actually do want to challenge. There's a comment in the chat here around, again, these things don't work in complex systems. I actually wholly disagree with that. I disagree with that because the complexity of a system only means that it is much more difficult to figure out what that kernel of value actually is, rather than figuring out what the solution should be. And I've been in situations where, like Microsoft is a great example of this, right? Like not only do we have tens of millions, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of stakeholders, right? Who, are responsible not only for consuming Microsoft's products, but also, you have different teams that have different products, different personae, different engineering teams working together, different products working together, right? And ultimately at the end of the day, if you cannot crystallize exactly what that small kernel of value is that you're attacking, it does not matter how big you are of an organization, a company, your customer base, even your product, right? You can sync. I have seen, this is the honest truth, I have seen products that have had 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 engineers and product folks and people working on it. They could not articulate that single kernel of value that they were solving. And overnight, gone. Just not a product anymore. We're moving on.
Yeah, you do bring up a good point there, in that I think a very common pushback I've heard about lean startup methodology is, it doesn't work in the enterprise, doesn't work for large companies, and I agree with you. You can make it work. I think if you just it's not easy. Lean startup is definitely, when you're doing lean startup versus if you're just thinking agile Scrum or Kanban, or if you're thinking the more simplistic processes, there's a lot of overhead. You're trying to figure out, how can I test a hypothesis? What should my hypothesis be? What problem am I trying to identify? What's my customer? How do I know that's my customer? And so you're spending a lot more time thinking before you do something. But at the end, it's not we're not trying to go faster, but hopefully we're trying to make less mistakes along the way, or go down less of the wrong paths as we get to that final product, or that better product. So with that said, I want to just throw it to both of you. Jamie, we can start with you. Do you have any final comments as we wrap up?
Yeah, kind of to that point about things not really working in complex systems. And it's not really just that point in general, but we talked about like decision making frameworks, and sometimes it's hard to, like, as you're working, to go remember a framework or remember this way of doing things. But I think it's really important as product managers that we just understand, like, prioritization, how to make decisions, and we help our organizations create a process for making those decisions. If we have a complex organization, we help them build a framework, and we apply pressure to make sure they're using those frameworks and things like that. There's a lot of different routes you can go with your decision making, but the goal is just to have some type of framework in mind to keep the team moving in the right direction. So that's kind of one of my takeaways is, hey, product looks different everywhere, but your goal is to understand what that ideal state is and help your organization get there.
Raj, any final comments?
Yeah, totally. I mean, look, I think this is a ultra relevant topic for every product manager. And I mean, I kind of mentioned this before, but like living, 24/7, kind of uncomfortably in the world of AI, I think the principles around learning, decision making, and storytelling become exponentially more important, right? Like everybody's used ChatGPT. What is ChatGPT? ChatGPT is telling the transformer network a story, right? And you're trying to with that story get some kind of value and benefit, right? And and there's all kinds of things out there. There's like how do you tell the story better? And people call them prompt engineering, right? Like it's this incredible like complexity of like, now we know the language and let's do interesting things with it. And I think on that note, right, there's an emerging a very, in my opinion, an incredibly exciting area of emergent AI that is focused on this thing called agents, right? And agents are basically not just when you're talking to like a chat GPT and you're getting it to respond to you, that's like a singular agent. An agent is you are giving the decision-making autonomy over to a thing, right? You're saying, hey, AI, I want you to make that decision for me. Go and take that action for me. So in the context of storytelling, right, what we're seeing is this new step function in AI development where folks are like, hey, this is pretty cool. Like, why don't you just go ahead and like book that Airbnb? Just do it for me. I don't want to have to do it. I don't want you to tell me where the Airbnb should be. I want you to actually go and do it for me. And I think every PM should, well, in my opinion, again, this is very opinionated. I think every PM should be aware of what that decision-making matrix is, potentially how to work with agents. I think it's going to be even more interesting as the technology goes ahead. I'm teaching a course at Maven that specifically focuses on AI agents with one of my colleagues and friends. If it's okay, I'll post the link in the chat.
Yeah, please do.
But I think it's a great opportunity, particularly around this topic, to figure out how do you take that next level, in your PM and product functionality.
Outstanding. No, those are all great advice. Yeah, I remember working on autonomous agents and AI when I was doing AI 20 plus years ago. And it's interesting to see how the concepts and the technologies evolved. since those beginnings. So I want to wrap up now, and really I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Everyone, all the off-camera attendees, your engagement, your questions, your comments, your opinions were awesome. And it's really what your participation. It's everyone who's been here tonight. It's really what makes our podcast unique. What makes TPG Live what it is. And I also want to again extend a special thanks to our speakers, Jamie Jelks, Vice President of Product Management at Candor Technology, and Raj Ricky, Principal Product Manager over at Microsoft, for really an awesome conversation, awesome insights, perspectives into storytelling and decision-making in product management. Everything from the Amazon press release, leaning into discomfort, mindfulness, contingency plans, what I really liked, welcoming unpreparedness, and stepping away, and most importantly, eating ice cream. So whether you're an engineer, a new product manager, a designer, a salesperson, a chief product officer, really a chief anything officer, or just someone maybe just curious about product management, it's your perspectives, your questions, your stories that make our conversations richer and really make TPG Live what it is. We'd love to have you join the on-screen roundtable. Please contact me if you'd like to join the on-screen roundtable. Contact me at jhorn, that's JHORN, at theproductguy.com. Or find me on LinkedIn as The Product Guy. I'm really easy to find, easy to contact there. Just reach out, let me know, and we can explore that. Also, there's just so many topics for us to cover, whether it's Moscow or even talking more about lean startup or any of the other types of topics that we maybe touched on tonight or didn't touch at all. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like for us to discuss in future episodes. And now I'd like to ask everyone for a favor. Please like, subscribe, enable notifications, and most importantly, if you know other product people or product curious folks or people who just love making better products, tell 5 of your friends about the TPG Live podcast. Tell them about the Product Way YouTube channel, and would really appreciate that. And that would really go far in showing your support for everything we've been doing tonight. And so just, again, thank you, everyone. I really can't wait to explore these new concepts in next month's TPG Live, where we explore diverse perspectives and continuous learning, expansive innovation. And so I just want to leave this one last thought. Just now go and amplify your impact. See you all next time. Bye.
Thank you.